You can word range, or there you go.
You could word this. So whenever you go for real, just give me an advance. And
okay. So I guess we can go ahead and get started. So switch back, get back on. There we go. Excellent. So today's presentation is Format String Vulnerability 101. Like I said earlier, I'm glad all these people could show up. It's pretty good. Got back from lunch. It's always a good thing. So a little bit about myself. My name is Deral Heiland. I go by that Twitter handle %X. There's my email address. I'm a senior security engineer for CDW from Dayton, Ohio. I've been in IT for over 20 years. I've been in security for over 10. I work as a pen tester, assessment engineer for CDW, doing corporate, government assessments, pen tests, all that fun stuff. So let's go ahead and move forward to what today's agenda is. This is an introduction to format strings. It's a 101. So to set some groundwork for this, one, I'm not a programmer. Okay, so how many programmers do we have in the room? Okay, we got quite a few programmers. That's good. Your job is, if somebody asks me a hard programming question, your job is to answer it. And if you can't, I will take it offline, I will find the answer, and I will get back to you, because it's important that you get an answer to your questions. So we're going to talk about the building blocks of the format string vulnerability, how to leverage those vulnerabilities to read and write arbitrary memory, and how that could potentially be used to change the flow of instructions on the system to take over a system, which is the ultimate goal. Things we will not discuss. We will not be discussing protection in the system. We will not be talking about DEP, ASLR. Won't be talking about any of those type of things. So I just want to let you know. So we're going to give you the groundwork. Once you get to that point, if you're dealing with a modern system that has ASLR, DEP, Safe SEH, you're going to have to find out how that works and tie that into your attack appropriately. We're not going to get into that. That's a whole several-day subject, just those few things there. And we're going to be talking about constructing a real-world exploit. Now I have a demo in here, so I don't know if we're going to get through the whole thing based on time. I was hoping to find a current format string vulnerability, something that's fairly current, but most of the ones I came across had some limitations, at least from a presentation standpoint. They weren't very visual, so they made it hard to get the audience to be able to visualize this whole format string vulnerability. So I used one from several years ago that was published. I don't think any code was put out on it. I wrote code because I wanted to prove that I could do it. So we're going to use that crappy code, at least going through the basics of format string vulnerabilities and how they work. So, introduction to a format string. So what is a format string? A format string is an ANSI specifier that is applied to a function to tell the program what the format should be. Fairly simple. If you have a program, and let's say you enter your name. My name's Deral. So I entered Deral. It echoes Deral back to the screen. Well, how did it know to give me Deral back to the screen? Format string specifiers. They tell it to output string data, hex data, octal data, floating pointers. So you can define what that function should output the data as. That's what a format string specifier is used for. And here's a couple of them. %S, floating pointer, %S, character string, X, hexadecimal, U, decimal, and there's a bunch of other ones. So moving on. Now here is a small snippet of functions that utilize format string specifiers that define what their output should be. A lot of you have done any programming, should be quite familiar with those. Those that haven't done any program, you should still be familiar with those. Those are the very common ones. So the building blocks of a format string vulnerability. They were first discovered in 1999, so they've been around for a while. The first exploit came out in 2000, the WFTB 2.6 version. And the peak of format string vulnerability discovery, it went up from there. Everyone started finding them, and it's gradually declined over the years. I'm actually cutting off the bottom of my screen. I just noticed that. That's a bitch. But 2012 there was 9, 2011 there was 8, 2010 I think it lists 13 or something like that. So there's not a lot of these being discovered. So we think, well, they're fairly rare. The reality is I still don't think they're rare. I just think we're not looking for them. The day my presentation was accepted, they got the email and said, hey, Deral, we want you to do your format string vulnerability 101. I was in a system playing around, and I go, cool, %S, 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 damn system crashed. Format string vulnerability in this system. The system was right in front of me. So I found one within 30 minutes of being told that I could do this presentation. Unfortunately, we can't release that here. The vendor asked me to hold off because it affects way too many of their product lines. So let's move on from here. So format string vulnerabilities, like I said, are created when programs not supply the format string specifier. Why does this not happen? A programmer takes shortcuts, he's being lazy. He doesn't want to actually enter it in. He's inexperienced, lack of experience. He's using old code blocks. And the reason why I say that is this year I think there's been like 3 format string vulnerabilities published out there in some open source FTP servers. I haven't looked at the code, so I'm just theorizing here. But every one of them had the same format string vulnerability. So I started thinking, well, I think these guys are probably using the same code block. Now, I could be wrong, could be just coincidence, but more likely it's a reuse of old code. These should never exist. They're easy to fix, easy to prevent. So let's start looking at them. Here is the correct use of a format string specifier. We're using the printf function. We're passing an argument here, and we're using the format string specifier right here to define what the output of that data should be from that function. In this case, it asks string data. It's going to output it as string data. So the way this works is if I enter welcome or hello world, it's going to output the string data as hello world. Bad code. Same code of block, but we see that the format string specifier is not defined. Now, a number of years ago when I did this presentation, one of the guys in the audience go, well, why doesn't a compiler figure this out? I didn't know. So I went to a programming friend of mine and I go, why doesn't a compiler let me know that this is incorrect? Well, it turns out that all these functions must, at a minimum, have one argument. But they have an infinite number of possible arguments can be passed to it. So there's no way for a compiler to know what arguments are correct or incorrect. It can only tell you whether the syntax is correct or incorrect in reference to that when it goes to compile it. So that's where the problem's at. So let's look at this actual code. Both of these code snippets will run and will work. So if we start off with the correct code and we pass hello world to it, it outputs hello world. Works fine. If we look at the incorrect code and we pass arguments like this to it, it outputs hello world. The code works correctly. So when does it fail? Well, the failure takes place when we pass format string specifiers. The correct code is going to render this data as string data. Looks quite normal. But when a program has been incorrectly written without the format string specifier, the program will actually take these as format string specifiers and it'll look for theoretical data that's supposed to be on the stack, and since there's none there, it drops the entire data actually off the process stack. So that's the general basis of a format string vulnerability. We have the ability here, as you see, with %x's, to read data off the process stack. Now we know we have a format string vulnerability that exists in this program. So next thing is leveraging format string vulnerabilities. What can we do with these? Like I said, as you can see, if the format string specifier is not defined in the function, the program will actually enumerate the data off the stack and display it to you. So what can an attacker do? Well, we know we could read off the stack, process stack. Well, with the %s, it takes those numbers that were returned from the stack and takes those as pointers in memory. And it'll go to that location in memory and it'll start reading from that address until it hits a null byte. So now we can actually read from memory. And %n is kind of a special format string specifier. It keeps a running account of the amount of characters that have been output by that format string, okay, or by that function. In this case, it'll also enumerate that location in memory. It'll go to that memory, and it'll copy or write to that memory location the information is in that %n counter. So if you output 50 characters in that string and then have a %n, it'll enumerate that address, that location, go to that address and write the number 50 out to that location, because that's where the counter's at. So we can read from the stack, we can read from memory, and we can read or write to actual memory. So it's a pretty cool thing. So let's see what we can do from there. We already know we can read from the stack, but let's go ahead. We have some programs, because I want this to be as visual as possible. So we got this simple little program here, and it works the same way. Here, let's minimize this. So you can see it can actually output data from the stack. So if we run this again, one of the things I hope you notice there is the address return are different, but the places that they were read from the stack, the locations in the stack, didn't change. A stack in a programming stack, process stack, is dynamic. It's a working area for the program to push information on and pull information off. So it's constantly changing. And this actually shows that I think every one of these is slightly different in some fashion. Okay, so now we can read from the stack. One of the things we always like to do is, right now we can read from the stack, we can read from memory, and we can write from memory. We want to be able to control those. So we want to be able to read and write from arbitrary memory. So the perfect storm is to be able to push your data onto the stack and then read it off or enumerate it as a memory address. Start by putting some A's on there, and we don't get anything back. So let's go up one more, %x. So what should we get back? What is the addresses? 41414141, okay. So there you go. So we can read the information that we've been able to put onto the stack. So if you're going to actually play with format string specifiers, one of the things I would recommend is kind of learning the entire alphabet, numeric characters, and converting it over to hex. It becomes a lot easier to read this stuff when you're just looking at a block of crap, to be able to pick stuff out of it. And a fun little trick that I did was every morning, and this is kind of bizarre, I actually made flip cards of the entire alphabet, special characters, and numbers. Flip cards for hex, conversion to hex. And when I was on the treadmill every morning, I'd go through these. And I did that to the point where I could walk up to a whiteboard, have someone read me a sentence, and while they were reading it to me, write it in hex. Now, I forgot most of that stuff. It came in real handy when I was doing some of this format string research. It made it so much easier. So now we can put data on the stack. We can see that data, pull it back off the stack with %x's. The ultimate is reading memory. This is a cool thing we want to do. But a couple things to talk about when reading memory is if you try to read a memory location that does not exist or write to a memory location that does not exist, you will throw an exception. So if we try to read from the memory location with a %s of 41414141 that doesn't exist, we should throw an exception. And I have Ollie debug in here. Unfortunately, my window size is like totally forked up. But we'll get it figured out. Okay. So we're looking at this. I don't think I can even get to the bottom. Where's that? I can't get to the bottom. Lower left-hand corner it says illegal read in memory. 414141. So let's go ahead and start the program back up in here. I don't know how many people mess with Ollie. This is the old Ollie. They got a new release of Ollie. I tried playing with it. It just started doing weird things with me, so I went back to the old one for presentation purposes. And there's some other debuggers out there people like to use. I'm a big Ollie fan. Most of the research, I'm a horrible reverse engineer. I could reverse engineer anything to save my life. But I'm fairly decent at dynamic analysis, and format strings play out really well for that type of attack vector and understanding that. But as we were mentioned, being able to write to memory, or read from memory. So let's go ahead and just a second. My notes disappeared. So I've made copies of some interesting memory addresses. I don't know how interesting they are, but they work. And print that little bit of text there equates to the memory address 77E47664. Fairly straightforward. So if we come over here and let's try to find that memory location. What was it? 77E77. Need to work on my alphabet here. 77E4. Here we go. 77E476. Oh gosh, hate this. So I think that was it. 7664. Is that right? You're all supposed to keep me in line. 77E47664. There we go. 7664. That's a memory location. Unfortunately, let's see what we got here. This is bad because we're not going to be able to compare the memory block because the screen's fighting me. But we can look at the actual data here. So we know we can read from this memory location right here. Let's go ahead and do it. Let's quit farting around. So let's go ahead and we can %S and instantly we're able to read from that memory location. So it's fairly straightforward. So if we change this to, let's just screw with the memory location. So you can see our A's. So we're actually able to read from memory. So now we can read arbitrary memory, push stuff onto the stack, use it as address and pointer, and able to read in memory. Some of the other things to be concerned with, and I missed this earlier, let's get it real quick. When you're dealing with Windows environment, we have 4 1s, 4 1s. We're dealing with little Indian. Even though we enter A, B, C, D, it reads out DCBA, 4 4, 4 3, 4 2, 4 1. So you need to take that into consideration. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is writing to memory. So we can go ahead and write to that same memory location. The output, we use a %n. %n will give us the ability to write to memory. What it's going to do is going to write the count out to memory. So if we go print whatever was in this output, so all these characters, and if we count those up, it'll see that we wrote memory. So now we can actually use the %n to write to memory. So we need to be able to control that to some extent. Remember, the stack is dynamic, so the data that we're reading off the stack with the %x's could change in length. And if it changes in length, it could change the numeric output of the %n. So one of the ways to fix that is to force these up to 8. And what this will do is cause them to store a %20 or a space. And by doing that, we can fix that. Remember, we're reading 4 bytes each time off the stack. So we can't make it smaller than the 4 bytes, which would be 8 characters output. But we can fix it to that number at a minimum. And that way you can at least stabilize what your %in's counting up to for an output. So if we do this, what should the output be? Count, quick. Okay, 4 eighths is what, 32? And the 4 characters that DV special weight W is 4 more, 36 characters. If we convert 36 over to hex, we should get 24. Oh, I got to write it out first. So now we can control what we've written out there. We've locked it into that space there. One of the other things you may have noticed that when you write out in the Windows environment, you cannot write a single byte. If you notice, we wrote 4 bytes. That means, let's redo this again. So if we set this at 4.1 and we run this, it will actually clobber the preceding 3 bytes. Okay, so you got to take that in consideration in any of your attacks using this, that you're going to clobber the preceding 3 bytes. So based on where you're writing into, you could actually just cause the program to crash right off the get-go because of that. So the next thing, let's jump onto the slides and see where we're at here. We covered writing to memory. Any questions at this point?
You said 4 bytes for Windows. What about OS X and Unix?
I still think it's 4 bytes, but I know there's techniques for reading shorter byte lengths versus longer byte lengths, and I'm not sure if the writing works the same way. Most of the work I've done has been in the Windows environment, the Intel environment. I've only played very little in the Unix, Linux environments, but there's a lot more cooler things that'll function in the Unix, Linux environments than Windows. There's a lot more restrictions, apparently, that I've discovered in the Windows environment, making leveraging format strings vulnerabilities significantly harder, in my opinion. We're going to discuss some of those a little more here in a second. Again, we can cause a denial of service condition by trying to write to a memory location that's illegal. Easy enough. So writing limitations within the Windows environment. This is kind of interesting. So you notice if we want to increment %n up, okay, so let's say we want to write a big address like down there at the bottom, F0FF FD7F. We want to write that to memory. It would have to cause us to increment the %n counter up by over 4 billion. Now, I wrote an exploit many years ago where the address space was 77 something, and it used up the entire 4 bytes. My exploit took 7 minutes. When I launched it against the device, everything on their console would lock up for 7 minutes, and then it would give me sysadmin access. But it's 7 minutes because it takes that long in some cases to increment that up. Some of the other issues you run into writing an address space out there is buffer sizes. I don't know if we have the time yet. But you can easily overwrite the buffer. In our little demo program there, if you try to increment that up to Heiland, you will overwrite the top of the stack and crash the program. So you can have buffer problem issues. Windows has actually certain buffer settings in some cases that limit each %x count. So you can, I've seen it set at 64, 128, 256, and 512, with the most common cap at 512 buffer. So that means if I wanted to write an address out that big, and I can only put 512 bytes in each %x, how many %x's am I going to have to put into my exploit to write 4 billion? Way too many. Not doable. So what's the solution? Well, the solution is doing it in 4 stages. Instead of writing one address out, you've seen how we wrote 24 out there. So what if I wrote that 4 times? That would give me the ability to do it quickly and write multiple addresses. That'll work if you can actually get multiple data onto the stack. Sometimes you can, sometimes you can't. The demo we're going to have in a little bit, you can't do that. But we can get one piece of data on the stack. But we're going to go through actually writing this address, F0FF FD7F, out to that location using our little program here in format string vulnerabilities. And let me kill some of these windows before I get too many of them opened up. Okay, so what we want to be able to do is, in this address space right here, we want to write at FF, or F0, FF, FD, F7, whatever the hell it was. out to that location. So we have to be able to supply each one of these addresses, and of course I pre-computed all those. Interesting thing is and this is one of the tools I do in Windows, if you use WordPad and use the Alt-X key, you can convert hex numbers. You can write like 41, go Alt-X, and it'll convert it to an A. So, and it goes back the other way too. So if you want to write weird addresses and you don't know how to create them on a keyboard, that's one way of doing it. If it's actually viewable in Windows, you could do that. If it can't be resolved in a Windows environment, it'll always convert it to a 3F, which is a question mark. You may have seen that in some cases. You look at a binary, you see all these question marks. That's because it can't tell you what the kid don't understand that character map. So this will work sometimes, but not all the time. In this case, it works pretty good. So let's go ahead and copy all of these over. So we have here the 4 preceding addresses. And let's look at them. Let's make sure they're correct. 774, whatever, 64, 65, 66, 67. So we have all the 4 addresses that we want to be able to control. So if we come back and change each one of these to an N, we will write out whatever setting into that counter to each one of these. And you can see we did it there. It's 31, 32, 33, 33. The reason why those two match is because the spacing between the last %N. So it makes sense here, we can fix that. So I got these spaces in here. So if we get rid of these spaces real quick, we should be able to make them all the same. Let's get them right. If I mess this up, the ultimate thing is the program's just going to crash. So there we go, 3333, 30303030. So now we can write 4 bytes, but they're useless at this point. So what we need to be able to do is pad out that string that I've input in there so that we can control each one of those bytes. The method for padding that out is fairly simple. Between each one of these bytes, we want to put filler. It can be anything you want. In this case, I'm just going to put A's in here as filler. And it's also important that you put these in the right place. Okay, so now we've got this point here. Now we have to put spacers between each one of these, or it's going to crash out because it's going to try to go to the address 414141. So we put a %8x between each one of these. At that point, when we go print, it should set each one of these, and each one will be 8 bytes higher, or 8 higher than the previous one. So you can see how we can start to structure this. So dealing with format strings, you know, I have a lot of friends that do buffer overflows and heap overflows, and I ask them about format string, and they shake their head and hit the side of their head and go, hell no. And it's real easy, but it's a big numbers game. And I always like numbers games. So it's a matter of just playing around with the numbers a lot and getting used to that. So we wanted to set the address, the first address, to F0. So it's fairly easy. Just use a calculator. So if we wanted to set it to F0, we go F0. We subtract what's sitting in there, 3C. Convert it to decimal and add 8 back into it, because remember we already got 8 padded on there and we have to take that into consideration, and we get 188. So if we come over here and go before the first %N, that's right there, and set this to 188, we get our F0. But now change the preceding ones, F8. So we want that to be FF. So it's fairly easy. Same thing. FF minus FO, which is obviously going to be 7. No. Let's get it right. FF. Was it FF? My numbers are coming up wrong. So this. FF. Okay. So FF minus F8. Let's get it right. F8. is 7 decimal plus the 8. We end up with 15. So the next thing is we set the next percent in right to 15. And then we have F0, F0, FF. And you continue down that same path. There's no need for us to teach you how to use a calculator. We got that figured out. But you follow the same process by doing this. And you go print. And we are able to do F0, FF, FD7F, and we control a 4-byte address in memory now that we can write. We don't have to do it in one large write, so it's quick, it's rapid, it's very effective. You can do a lot of damage with it, and we'll show doing some damage with this here in a minute. Any questions at this point?
So step 1, find a program that's got a format string vulnerability. Step 2, start mapping out where that's the play.
Yeah, I'd like to map out where it's at in the stack. Where am I reading off the stack? Can I put data onto the stack? Once I can put data off the stack, being able to control that, structure it out just like that there, and now I can read and write any arbitrary memory location that's read and writable by me. Some of the attacks I used. Yeah, we got time. Novell. I found my first format string was purely accidental by hitting the keys on the keyboard and hitting enter. Purely that was it. My damn computer blue screen, and I'm like, what the hell? So I went to a programming friend of mine. He goes, what could cause that? Because I can't repeat it. I didn't type anything normal. I just hit the keyboard. He goes, I've been doing a little research. Maybe it was a format string. Wow, what the hell is a format string? So we went over and tried it. Sure enough, that's what it was, and that's what got me working. Well, it turns out that in this particular program, I could only read stuff off the stack. The %n did not work. %s, I couldn't put stuff on the stack. So I contacted Novell and said, hey, you got a format string in your in-mass process for authentication. Is their authentication process. And they came back and said, okay, yeah, we'll take care of it. 6 months later, they released a patch. I downloaded the patch. I'm like, wow, they finally fixed it. I put it on there. Hell no, they didn't fix it. Matter of fact, now I can put my data on the stack and control it. So they made it worse. But I still couldn't get a %in. So I told them, look, guys, you just made this thing worse. You're going to fix it. 6 months later, I hear nothing. So I sent them an email and go, look, if you guys are not going to fix this, I'm going to publish an advisory. The head of their development team, PR, whatever, came back and said, talk to the development team. This is not a risk. We aren't going to patch this. Go ahead. You've done your due diligence. Release your advisory. So I released my advisory and did that on a Friday. And so I'm sitting there in front of the TV with my wife with my laptop and going, there's something evil I can do with this. What can I do evil? So I start digging through all the memory on the InMap program, looking for something I would like to see. And it turns out the InMap process, which has handled authentication and encryption, stored the RSA private key in the InMap section. So by creating 4 bytes like that and going %x, 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 %s, I was able to dump remotely. If someone had RDP on a box running this Novell authentication client, I could dump the entire InMass RSA private key to the screen. So I wrote up an email and I sent it off to the guys and I go, here, try this. It was like 4 easy steps that they could do. And I said, this is why I think you should patch it. Sent that out on Sunday. Monday morning, like 10 o'clock, I received an email from this manager. The first line, he goes, oh, shit has hit the fan. We will have a patch this week for you. And they gave me a patch a couple days later. So there's all kinds of cool stuff that can be done with these, let alone gaining control of the instruction pointer. So discovering these. Every format string I've ever discovered was done manually, not with any tools. I found a number of format string vulnerabilities aren't directly inputs, but they're preceding follow-up functions that you may do. So fuzzy automatically always become inherently difficult because it took some user intervention. I've found probably a dozen or more format string vulnerabilities over the years, and I think 3 of them were rights escalations, 2 of them were remote exploits. Some of them you really couldn't do anything useful for other than just crash the thing. So it varies. So some of the techniques, I always look for things that are echoed back to me, things that are written in logs, things that are processed in their string data off to something else but not format string specified properly. Be able to name processes, file name and path name. So the coolest one I ever found was basically a path name. So I put the format string vulnerability as a file name and then enumerate it with the application. It would trigger the attack. So it's all kinds of interesting ways of doing this. So building a functioning exploit, and we have 15 minutes, right? Okay, this ought to be fun. Like I said, I was hoping to get something that was a little more current. I apologize. Nothing I thought was very nice or usable. But in Millworm, in March 2009, THC Labs released a vulnerability in Wireshark version 1.06. And what they published out there was just denial of service killer. It was a PCAP file that would crash the application. So I went from that point there, and I don't think anyone's actually wrote an exploit for this. So I was probably the only one. Is it a good written exploit? Hell no. Does it work? Yeah, it works. It still works currently. On an XP, I don't know if it'd work on a Windows 7 because some of the coding was what doesn't take into consideration depth and ASLR and anything like that that may play an impact in that. But it was a good example for visualization. So don't try to read this. This is horrible. But this is what was published on Millworm. So this is a little program. When you compile it and run it as an executable, it will create a PCAP file. And then you can replay the PCAP file, blah, 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 blah. So this code block here, when I exploded it up, we instantly see, here's the format string, %n, 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 and I assume that they discovered this fuzzing some other product, and they crashed their Wireshark in the process, because the dissector didn't handle that protocol well. So what I did here was I came in and I changed all these to %x's so they wouldn't crash the program, and then we went ahead and kind of looked at them. You know, and we could see that there was actually 4 packets in this PCAP file. Well, I don't need 4 packets. So the whole idea was I went and cleaned it all up. So I hand-coded all this to take out those 4 packets and expand the packet to contain a whole lot of %x, comma, or %x, comma, %x, commas. And that way I could pull all this data off the stack in its laid out structure and eliminate it. So it was all visual type thing, an attempt to figure out and map out the stack and where I'm at on the stack and how the whole thing's going to work. The red stuff here was just changing the packet link data. So mapping out the stack. Let's go ahead and do a dump of this. I think we can do that. Dump of this, make this go away. Okay, so here we are. Let's see if we can scroll over, and we can see a little bit of this data from the stack. And if we right-click on that, copy, come on. There we go. Bring it up. So you can see we mapped out a fairly large chunk of the stack area, or a block of the stack area. I don't expect everyone to see that. So the whole goal here was to attempt to map out the stack, but the stack was so dynamic in this particular application, so dynamic, that over 2/3 of these changed. So you're like, gosh, I ended up taking, a half dozen screenshots or captures before the data actually started coming together and going, okay, here I am on the stack, I know where I'm at now, now what can I do here? I believe in this case here, the stack is somewhat fixed in this application, in this version. So it stayed at 12 dB/8, no matter what, whether it was a VM, whether the stack structure stayed the same, so it doesn't have any kind of ASLR changes, rotating stack, all that weird stuff. So it's pretty much fixed in this case here, so it kind of worked pretty good. So the next thing we wanted to do was put our A's on the stack. Let's pull that data off, see if we can find out where we're at. So all those percent X's I changed and put almost A's all the way through there. And then I put a percent S against an address I know would crash it, crashed the application, looked at the stack, and found out my A's were there, but they were so far up on the stack that I would have to have over 500% X's to even get access to them. Doable, very doable, but I'm lazy. I don't like typing hundreds and hundreds of percent X's, at least in initial development. And, once you get it figured out, you can programmatically structure that so you're not entering all that crap. But in this case here, that was it. So then we had to find some other place. Not accessible. And then we came down to XID. I don't know if you saw that. It's one of the other fields in the protocol I thought was interesting. So right here where it says XID 100001, that looks like it could be it right there. So the question is it? Is that what it is? So let's go ahead and start this back up. This is it. Send the PCAP. So you can see the XID was set to 4141. We did that in the PCAP file. If we come over here and we copy, let's see if I get this right. First time. Test. Come down here, cut, paste, and I don't know how good your eyes are. It would be on the edge. Right there it is. Yes, 41414141. So now we're actually controlling 4 bytes on the stack. So it gives us a potential place for injecting a pointer into memory. So where do we go from here? So in this particular case here, gaining control VIP, I wanted to, since I can read and write to a memory location, what memory location would I want to read and write to? That's always the big question. Well, I discovered a number of years ago, if you're dealing with like DLLs, and the DLL isn't affected by some of the ASLRs and stuff, let's say it's in a fixed address space, which is important if you're writing to a memory address that it doesn't change. And there's still a lot of that out there. A lot of it's going away. That's for you to figure out and solve those problems. In this case, it was fairly simple. There was a program, a DLL as part of this, in module libglib. And this had, if you go into the data section of most DLLs that I've played with, there are pointers in there. And those pointers directly control EIP, instruction pointer. And if you change them somewhere in execution of the program, it will actually pass what you put in there as the next instruction pointer. We wrote a little program, me and my friend. What it did was, we'd run the program until we got to a certain point where our stuff was getting ready to execute. And then what we would do is we would overwrite every address in the next data section that was going to be, or the program that was run, the data section. Every address in there would be overwritten. And then what happened when we kick off the program, and our program would create a map list of what the address was and what it got changed to. So when we got an illegal memory address, we compare that on our chart, and it'd tell us exactly where the base address in the data section where this pointer was called from. It was a cool little program. And we use that a lot of times for gaining control of instruction pointer. Because once we get to this point, what's the next point? We have to have some place to write our data. So in this case, it's 6A62 F0 B0. And in this case, we can gain control of instruction pointer by overwriting that. And we're running out of time quickly. So, now that we've done all of that, So we're going to bring up Ollie. We're going to show where the percent ends, getting ready to overwrite the pointer. And then we're going to walk through the pointer being called and flow of execution jumping over. And then we'll kick off the exploit, which will full exploit, which will create a shell on the device at port 666 that you can tell that into. And then we'll talk about, if we have time, some of the other weirdness that I did here. Okay, file, attach. Yeah, we got 5 minutes to do this. Ollie's slow attaching to this program. But generally in this case here, while this thing's attaching, so we cover some of the other stuff. In the overall exploit that I finally pulled off in this, it turns out that in that area I could write my A's at, on the actual stack were really fragmented little pieces. But there was bigger blocks in the heap. The heap was always moving, so I didn't know where this moving target was. But in this case, the stack pointer was not moving. So my data was at the same location, but I was limited to only 32 bytes. So it's like, okay, I know I can get that 32 bytes to execute, but how do I get the bulk of my code to run from there, since it's always moving around? Well, I used an egg hunter. And are you familiar with an egg hunter? Great little piece of code. The one I have here looks through all the memory. And I have who wrote it written up there on the preceding slide. I'll probably never get to those. But generally what it did was it kicks out the egg hunter and it looks for an egg. And mine was 5090, 5090. So it starts through all the memory. When it hits 5090, 5090, it jumps 8 bytes over and starts execution. Instantly kicks off my shell. So we're at this point here. Let's get Wireshark back running. This is a pain in the ass. So we jump to that memory location. Jump to that memory location. There we go. We're actually going to set a breakpoint on memory write because this is in the data section of libglib, and we're getting ready to overwrite data on there. So let's all pray this actually works. And then we'll kick off our next PCAP file. And at that point, we should have hit a breakpoint, and we can't really see that breakpoint, but I'm sure that it's there. Let's go ahead and come down here to follow and dump, select it. That's the memory location. So the next right here. So we're going to walk through this. This one should overwrite that memory location here eventually. Here we'll get to the point where it's getting ready to do that. Okay, that should be it. And if we look at this program here, it's, oh, okay, it already wrote the data. Apparently it jumped to right memory location. I apologize for that. But what it's getting ready to do is we overwrote that pointer, okay, at 6862. It's not going. I'm sorry about this program. I didn't expect the screen to be this screwed up. But it overwrite the address. This is the pointer getting ready to be called. So our %n overrode the pointer. The ECX register was containing the %n data. It wrote it out to this pointer location at 6862B0, F0, whatever it was, 6862F0B0. And now we've got to the point where it's getting ready to call that. So when we call this, the program's going to crash because dead was actually written in there if this thing actually captured up properly. Let's see what happens. And it did. So if I could actually get my freaking screen to work here. Oh, that's even worse. And I can't even get to it. There it is, there it is, there it is. As we see, we've set the instruction pointer to dead. I know that was boring. I wish you could have seen the whole thing. I should have figured that one out. I knew this thing was going to screw me up. So I apologize for that. Any questions at this point before we kick off the exploit? Okay. Let's go ahead and bring up Wireshark. I was hoping to show you the percent in counter writing over that, but I skipped over. I clicked one too. I was clicking down because right where we were at, the first click would have overrode it. But for some reason, when I set the dump up, it didn't show it on the screen. It put it below my screen. So, capture interface. So, go ahead and start this up. Run cmd stat -a. So we're going to open up a listener port on this thing on 666. And that should actually do it. We'll see how quickly it goes. Remember, it has to walk through memory. So remember, this egg hunter's tracking through all the memory on the device. There it is. So now we have 666 running on the device. You could easily set up a reverse shell, any kind of code block that you could punch into the deep area to be able to get this thing to work. So, 83666. And the interesting thing I found, whenever you're doing a demonstration and you're not attached to the internet, most of my boxes do everything at half the speed they normally do. Like they're trying to do freaking DNS's lookup somewhere that's not set up. So this will actually kick off a connection here in a second. That's what it did in my hotel room. But when I'm hooked to my home network, it's like instantaneous. So one of the things I do for presentations is kind of take them offline like that. We've actually run over a second, and there you go. I got a command prompt on the remote device. So there you go. I'm going to be around the rest of the day, probably tomorrow morning. I hope you guys got something useful out of this. I think this is a fun subject and a fun thing to play around with. You don't have to be some uber hacker programmer to learn this stuff, and there's a whole lot of cool papers on the internet on this subject that you can take what I've given you and expand to the next level with. So thanks a lot for coming. I appreciate it.